According to my save file, it's been almost exactly a year since I last played Ghostware's early access build, and now here we are, at the full June 10th release on Steam. So I guess you're here wondering how it all shaped out. So let's get stuck in like a floppy disk and figure out whether this 90s style shooter has got the goods, or whether it's dead on arrival.
Some answers would be good. Okay, let's go then.
So Ghostware Arena of the Dead, not to be confused with Ghostware Tokyo, RIP Tango Gameworks, is developed by a dev team who were masterminded by Mothership Loudspeakerz, who was gracious enough to send me a review copy for this video. So many thanks, Mothership, and let's see if he's going to regret that decision. Okay, so what is the strange-looking and strangely named Ghostware? Well, it's as different as it looks. Ghostware is certainly part of the recent retro shooter revival that we've had over the last 5 to 6 years, but what sets it apart is that it doesn't recall Doom or the Build Engine or Half-Life or any of the more obvious games, but instead leans into the slightly more atmospheric classics of the era like Deus Ex and Unreal, and some smatterings of perhaps Quake 2 and Quake Champions. Now, if that sounds like a weirdo blend, don't worry, Mothership and friends make it weirder still. Supposedly inspired by such things as the notoriously esoteric TV show Lost, Ghostware's scenario starts out with the bodacious Molly coming to life inside a digital world, recalling the start of Jurassic Park Trespasser if you know what I mean. She and several others have essentially been resurrected inside a simulation to participate in various game types, in an attempt to make the Galactimac Corporation tons of money by reviving the Bloodsport arenas of old. The people here are in a kind of in-between state, neither living nor dead. They're ghosts, if you will, which is where the game gets its name from. This wacky operation is spearheaded by the Wizard, a neckbeard goofball who wants to recapture the glory days of arena shooters as a response to the horrors of modern gaming's excesses and need for instant gratification. We even get a weird meta level where some guy reminisces about LAN parties and the glories of launch parties. The story setup is full of life and originality and some pretty fun dialogue, always leaning into the cheese, always in on the joke. It's good, lighthearted fun, and it matches the game's brisk pace too. Ghostware's levels aren't so much Doom as they are perhaps Quake 2 or Unreal. There's a lot of corridors and high-tech facilities with minimalist architecture, but with occasionally techno-organic spoopy stuff seeping in for some texture. And you're rarely in any of these for too long, even shifting to some outdoor areas that give me a lot of Unreal but also perhaps Turok vibes. Level interaction is really just down to some switch flips and platforming, but this all seems to be in service to keeping the story's pace up, and I didn't mind not being kept for long, as the scenery was always changing. As for platforming, you can double jump and pull off a Call of Duty-esque slide to gain momentum and then super jump, but these mechanics are often tested past their limits, and so entertaining these sections is an exercise in tedium oftentimes, not a rewarding challenge. Even up to the last chapter, I was still having to grin and bear these platforming sections. The main problem is that the double jump has a really particular way in which it wants you to click the second jump to make sure it goes off. If you miss this hard to pin down window, you just fall. And a lot of times it takes a while to get back up to where you need to go again, if you don't just get shot all the way back to the beginning of this platforming section. Thankfully, these only come up here and there, and the game leans away from platforming as it goes on. There are a lot of gimmick levels, though, with middling success. In keeping with the referential tone set by the opening, Ghostware makes playing through Quake Champions style deathmatch or capture the flag matches part of its story. These can range from almost so simple and easy they're forgettable to bone-crunchingly hard.
Easy.
They're nostalgically fun for a bit though, as you get to relive the glory days of playing those arena shooter style games with your buddies online, as the bots do a decent job of putting up a fight, at least most of the time. That said, these levels can feel gimmicky after a bit, sort of a wink-wink, nod-nod self-awareness that never quite makes for engaging in a firefights against the AI. Like I said, it's good they don't prolong these, but the first hour or two is definitely chock full of them. The enemy AI just kind of makes or breaks a lot of these encounters. The AI does unfortunately wig out quite a bit. If I just got in the middle of a firefight and backed up far enough, the AI would lose interest and just let me pop them with a pistol as they stood completely unbothered by their impending death. Okay, so I guess that brings me to the combat proper. I won't be the first to say combat's amazing, but it's got a lot of nice individual aspects. The guns, for one thing, are quite well designed. The basic pistol, which eventually upgrades into a better version, feels weighty and has good feedback, and fortunately lets you hold the trigger to keep firing instead of having to click every time to get another round off, something that greatly helped me once I discovered it, as it was often my only weapon fighting against some bosses. The weapon suite otherwise is a great mix of standbys with original weaponry. You get a very meaty sounding double-barreled shotgun a la Quake 2, and it feels like you're kicking a fridge through someone when you pull the trigger. The machine gun has a ton of spread and consequently feels a lot like Quake 2's little SMG, and it can be quite rewarding to tame its wild spread and kill someone in close with it. The original weapons are where it's at though. The bubble gun shoots out purple bouncy balls that do damage. It can be banked off walls to hit enemies around corners, which was endlessly fun. The physics are very predictable too, and so getting good with the gun is very intuitive and satisfying to pull off. The grenade launcher is a little wonky to use since it was a little hard to understand the delay in between shots, but it does the job. There's a freeze ray that shoots little ice blasts, or you can shoot a jet of freezing cold out and lock enemies in place, which seems to look cooler than it actually works since shooting them with anything else seems to unfreeze them. There's another heavy repeater gun that fires highly damaging but very high recoil shots, and an electric kind of railgun type thing that's not so much super powerful as it is accurate and, does the job. There's even a concussion shotgun which feels good when it connects, but it's impressively inaccurate. It has a artificially long delay in between shots that maybe just need to be communicated by a chambering animation to indicate what in the next round is ready. There's even a flamethrower here that's actually good for once, as most FPSs implement these without any care for how good they are. All in all, it's a good weapon suite that would make Unreal Tournament proud, and my only complaint is that enemies can be crazy hard to hit sometimes, even on keyboard and mouse, which really just boils down to feeling like the AI is tuned to be a little bit faster than the weapons actually aim and can hit. Like there's not quite a seamless rhythm where you can feel like you're finally getting good with the guns. I also hated the fact that you get all these cool weapons but lose them every time you die. You don't lose much progress normally when you do, which is nice, but I'd much prefer it just start me over with everything I had at the last checkpoint, so I'm not constantly missing out on the cool variety of guns. Now, the one thing I noticed was that the game's only real friction is the platforming. It's the one major place where the game makes you pay attention to it and fails you pretty hard until you get it right. Most of the boss fights are pretty easy by comparison, and while that's not a crime, and I don't really need anything to be challenging to have fun with it, I do feel like a lot of these were easy enough on medium difficulty to feel sort of wimpy, like they weren't really obstacles. And I noticed that anytime fights got hard, like when the encounter design finally goes good in the last level, but also kind of shit because of how hard it is to both keep a bead on enemies and avoid getting hit yourself. It's like the game's just not quite synced up to make the gunfights have rhythm and feel like the tide's breaking your way or that you know how to make it break your way. It's just sort of hopping around incessantly, hoping you're dodging people with your little slide move and then just sort of returning fire, but it feels chaotic in the wrong way, as opposed to just being like, whoa, I can't believe I pulled that off. It's more like, I didn't die? That's weird. It's no doubt that this intangibility of what feels good but also challenging and rewarding is just one that's hard to pin down in general. I mean, we're spoiled rotten to how many games do this well, or at least convince us that they're doing it well. But here, I kind of walked over most bosses or encounters or found myself beating my head against a wall trying to get the jump to work as a dodge or keep a beat on the bosses as they hop around, which never really felt like quite the right challenge to pay attention to, or the one that's the most interesting and fun. Now, the other aspects of combat that were interesting but perhaps a little undercooked were the things that supplement your gun abilities. You get a blinding dust ability early on that fuzzes up bad guys' vision for a sec and kind of makes them immobile and inert. Unfortunately, this little blinding dust spell seems to be broken if you shoot them, so its only use is to basically time out an opponent for a very short amount of time while you focus on other ones. It's hard enough to aim this thing and so dubiously effective that I didn't really find much use for it, to be honest. The same goes for the other abilities, like the invincibility mode that makes it to where you can't shoot until it's done making you invincible, which didn't seem particularly useful. I did find some use for the hammer that you get later on, but almost used it accidentally for incidental damage as I kept hitting shift thinking I was engaging a sprint when there is no sprint in this game because you're already moving pretty fast. The game moves away from accuracy-based shooting when it gives you stealth options later on, but there's only 2 or 3 places to use it. You do a simple crouch and then click use on these guys to knock them out, which is all Deus Ex and shit, and I liked it, but it feels like another lightly implemented reference more so than committed game design. It's totally inoffensive, mind you, but it does contribute to the game feeling like a hodgepodge of various, oh, that's that thing from this game for a little bit. Okay, all right, now do Unreal, or, whatever other game. It's not bad per se, but it can make the game feel like it's light on the details because it's trying to account for too many of them. But all of this competent but loose, ever-shifting design really kind of feels like the game's identity, for better or worse. Ghostware alternates very frequently between different types of missions and activity states for the player. Sometimes just letting you wander, sometimes outdoors, sometimes indoors, sometimes it's very flat and winding, and sometimes it's interested in scaling large structures and platforming. There's a lot of that kind of urban adventure vibe you might get from playing Deus Ex. There are hub areas where you'll putter around with NPCs and light banter, and maybe pick up a lore detail or two and select your next missions, often by just walking through whatever new glowing hole that wasn't there before in your last mission. And as varied and crafted as it can all feel, there are quite a few areas in the second half of the game that feel uncommitted to, like they're a concept that was never quite grandfathered into the big picture. For instance, a casino level is set up like you're going to have to play poker games or, other casino-esque games to get out, as you've been basically brought here by a big bad who's just revealed himself. So you think it's going to be kind of, a Casino Royale, James Bondy, like, do or die. And then you realize that the game's version of poker makes sense on the rules screen, but then you get into the match and it's just basically a death match. I never had to use any of the mechanics that were flashing up on screen to cash things in or reset my loadout. I just sort of picked up what weapons were there and blew people away like I would in any other deathmatch game. There's even another one of these supposed mini games that's really just a boss fight with a guy who has some cool counterattacks that he puts into place every time you hit him, so you have an increasing number of problems to deal with over the course of this boss battle. It's a good idea, but they're all over so quickly, and then you just leave this big casino hub before you've really had any chance to feel like you were in a casino doing anything remotely related to the theme, and then it's gone forever. The same kind of missed opportunity applies to some of the major plot points, or at least what feels like them. For instance, Molly turns a corner and sees a major character strung up in this glowing chamber in this sort of strange state that we've never seen them in before. And as she gets closer to them, the scene cuts, and we're like, whoa, what just happened there? Then the shot changes to the other members of her party, and then Molly walks into the shot with her face obscured and starts talking. And I'm like, oh man, did that thing possess her in some way that we're not allowed to, see her face or we'd know what's up as the audience? Why be withholding? What's going to happen? But then the scene just sort of ends like the game forgot its own stakes and what we literally just saw. Nothing comes of the scene. Similarly, there's a truly weird intermediate state towards the end of the game that houses an alternate ending within it. If you find a requisite item, you can actually interact with one of the computers here to unlock it, but I never found this item to even try it. Nothing wrong with that, but you do kind of begin to wonder, well, what's the purpose of this strange facility? After all, you're surrounded by the very faction that's been shooting at you the whole game, and all of a sudden they're just not, and they're not really giving you a very good indication of why they aren't. Even more disconcerting, their leader sits in a glowing red bathroom and tells you almost nothing about who he is or what's going on here. And I went in circles here before I realized that the game didn't have anything else for me to do. I needed to get back in the rail car I came in, and then it would take me actually farther down the line to the final area. But you're given fewer and fewer breadcrumbs that make sense as the story unfolds or maybe unravels. For instance, there's a hacker character that you meet fairly early on in the game that's giving you background stories and basically saying, here's what's going on, here's as much as I can tell you, I'm kind of under duress, I'm going to try to get you to help me to undermine the corporation that's doing this, and we'll take them out together. That kind of classic trope. The hacker just sort of shows up out of the blue and reveals themselves right before the final boss fight. There's not even any voice acting like the hacker gets. So it's really weird to have this fully voiced out character that's been pretty important to the plot supposedly reveal themselves in an even less convincing and immersive way than they've been interacting with you to date. And then it just sort of be pushed away immediately as you've got a boss to kill. Then the game ends with a very Deus Ex Matrix style text scrawl. That's very kind of highbrow sounding, but I could not tell you what any of it means. Even on a, we're trying to go for cheese or a reference here kind of level. So too does Ghostware, and I couldn't really tell you beyond the very specific and wacky premise of people coming back to life inside a simulation exactly what's going on here. What was the fun of the high concept for the creators themselves? It's to the game's credit that it's just narrative driven as it is and made me keep wanting to figure out what was going to happen next. There's a certain point at where its focus starts to kind of play against it. Take BioShock Infinite and The Last of Us, for example. Back in 2013, I remember liking both of those probably less than I should have because it felt like the stories were overshadowing the gameplay mechanics to such a great extent that when the game was actually stopping to be a game and making me do gameplay loops and set pieces and stuff, I wasn't having nearly as much fun as I was just getting to the next cutscene or the next piece of story because it was making my enjoyment so dependent on knowing more about what was going on or what was going to happen to these characters. Ghostware can kind of have that problem where it's like it feels like you're just plowing through sort of mid-major gameplay to get to the next story point to hopefully have it reveal itself and become more engrossing and more great big picture that's coming into focus. But Ghostware is often just sort of fun and light to horse around with, and that makes the increasingly incomprehensible story much less distracting, because there's some vibes to enjoy along the way. The music gets a really big nod here, as it's a pleasing blend of the agile techno that Unreal and Deus Ex both had, while being able to slow down and build atmosphere from time to time as needed. That being said, sometimes it can feel like a game that's trying to get you to accept that ignorance is bliss. Okay, so I know this has been kind of a stream of consciousness review, and I think that's partially because of the subject matter here. So let's take stock of all that Ghostware does and whether that's good enough to relieve you of your $15. I've never quite known what to make of Ghostware, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's probably not a great thing. It's almost completely divorced from the hyperactive movement shooting of Ultra Kill or Turbo Overkill or Dead Link or what have you, and that's something I appreciate. I like those slower, a little bit more methodical, atmospheric games, more so than I need to have the upteenth adrenaline shooter pumped into my veins. Ghostware is straightforward, and it's not terribly gameplay demanding outside of the deathmatch or boss fights, and sometimes not even then. You can breeze through it in about 5 to 6 hours, I'd imagine, which isn't a ton of content for the average hours-obsessed gamer, but the game is on the cheaper side of indie games these days, and it's a lot more unique, too. Ghostware has personality and charm and taps into the lesser-traveled spirit of Deus Ex and Unreal nicely, with its kind of techno-tribal soundtrack and emphasis on exploration and taking in a level versus blasting a crowd in every room. It's unafraid to change up the intensity, and it's to be commended for that. But your enjoyment of it will largely depend on how much you enjoy its offbeatness, as it waits until the last level to put together a decent set of shootouts inside office spaces that feel truly intense and almost fear-esque, with glass flying everywhere and bullets going cray-cray. The weapons roster is pretty good, but it's not given much room to let you actually shoot them. The platforming never feels consistently responsive enough, and the stealth and alternative abilities feel undercooked and somewhat superfluous. But I'd have a hard time not commending Ghostware for taking me to a new place and getting me invested in a different mode, a different speed, different vibe, if you will. That said, there is a lot about Ghostware that feels unfinished, mechanically speaking, or like there were too many cooks in the kitchen, or too many ideas that seemed fun, but an insurity of which the right ones to lean into. It's nice the game passes the vibe check, if you will, but vibes are often not enough to carry an experience. But perhaps there's something here for you if you want something a little offbeat, a little different, and a little more unique in your library from the average retro shooter, if not always for the right reasons.
Okay, that will be enough.
Thanks for watching. And a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by subscribing to my Patreon. I have to thank Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, He Act Show, and M for their contributions. And a special thanks to the Nth Review and James Wyatt for subscribing to my Patreon's highest tier. And a huge shout out to this month's new Patreon member, Bibby Effin Blocksberg. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you around. If you'd like to be part of the reason this channel gets bigger and better, feel free to go over to patreon.com/high-functioning-medium, or you can become a YouTube channel member, or if you prefer, you can donate at Ko-fi. Also check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to contribute to the channel with no cost to you. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon.